Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us for this CTD webinar. We're pleased to welcome Diana Petschauer and Kelsey Hall, and they are joining us to discuss supporting learners with dyslexia, standards, accommodations, technology, and strategies. I'm going to pass it over to them, and they'll get started.
Thanks, Anna Maria. Hello, everyone. We're presenting your webinar this evening. I'm Diana Petschauer, and I'm co-presenting with Kelsey Hall. And we're going to switch over to the slides for a brief introduction and to get started. So thanks for joining us, and use that chat.
Also, we want to remind you after the survey, after the webinar, please fill out our survey, and at the end of the survey, you will have the option to get a certificate of participation. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Anna Maria. So as mentioned, please make sure you fill that survey out at the end. You will receive your certificate of participation, and certainly wonderful to get the feedback if you benefit from this webinar and any of the other webinars from CTD. So let's get started this evening. We have a lot to share with you. I am Diana Petschauer. I'm a RESNA certified assistive technology professional and founder of the company AT for Education. We have 11 consultants with various specialty areas who travel daily throughout many states in New England. And on a yearly basis, all year round, we travel nationally and internationally to provide assistive technology evaluations and training, as well as professional development workshops, webinars, etc. So feel free to check out our website later for more information. I am co-presenting this evening with Kelsey Hall, and she is an expert in assistive technology, augmented communication, as well as literacy. And I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey to tell you more about herself and to get us started this evening with the webinar.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're all joining us today. My name is Kelsey Hall. I am a teacher of the deaf and a speech-language pathologist. I'm also a certified Orton-Gillingham instructor through IDA, the International Dyslexia Association. And I have founded the company Bridges to Learning, and that focuses on speech and language evaluation and support for literacy and language development. And I'm excited to be here with all of you. So today we're going to be talking about dyslexia and supporting students and learners with dyslexia. We'll be looking at standards, accommodations, and different strategies. Some important information about dyslexia. It is very common, and this is something I think a lot of you are probably joining us tonight and today because you probably have students or people that you work with who have dyslexia. This definition right here that you can see on your screens is through the International Dyslexia Association, and you'll see that on your screen there's highlighted words here: specific learning disability, neurobiological, fluent word recognition, core spelling, decoding. These are all characteristics of individuals who experience dyslexia. And specific learning disability is a term that you might hear, especially if you work in a K through 12 school. We tend not to use the word dyslexia. You don't hear that very often, but you will hear specific learning disability, and usually it's stated to be in the area of reading, basic reading skills, comprehension, and sometimes writing as well. So there's a lot of different ways to talk about dyslexia, and we'll get into some of that too, but this is a definition through the International Dyslexia Association that kind of outlines classic profiles of individuals who experience this disability. So a lot of times people have been throwing around, are there different kinds of dyslexia? And the interesting thing about this is people have thrown out multiple hypotheses. You might have heard of single deficit, double deficit, triple deficit dyslexia. So if you hear single deficit dyslexia, often it relates to difficulties with phonological processing. So manipulating sounds and words, kind of your ability to break words apart by sound, put them back together, alter them. You might have also heard of double deficit dyslexia, and this is related to phonological processing challenges, rapid naming. Rapid naming is specific to quickly, effectively, and efficiently decoding text. And often you might find students experiencing deficits in 2 of these 3 areas, 1 of these 3 areas, or even all 3. So you might hear triple deficit dyslexia. Orthographic, this is related to how students connect sound to a specific symbol. And usually individuals who have orthographic challenges are usually pretty solid in phonological awareness. So students can experience a number of challenges, and that's a hypothesis that's been put out there and people should be aware of. So what do we know, given what we know about dyslexia? How do we support these students?
So instruction matters. We want to make sure that we're specifically looking at instruction that is structured, multisensory, explicit, systematic, that they practice often and they have the opportunity to practice often, diagnostic and prescriptive, meaning it's personalized to that specific student, progress monitored, and cumulative. And we're going to be talking about and explaining all of these different aspects of the specific instruction that benefit all students, but especially students that have dyslexia. Kelsey, more about the National Reading Panel.
Yes, so the National Reading Panel in the year 2000 came out with a relatively lengthy report, and we do have a link to it later on in the presentation. There's also a link to an overview. A big part about this is there were 5 major areas that were identified as needing to be instructed when you're considering reading instruction. And that explicit instruction in phonemic awareness, so again, going back to thinking about how sounds are made, how being able to tap out syllables, break words apart, and then also phonics instruction, letters and connecting letters to sounds. Also fluency. If you're struggling to be a fluent reader, you'll have difficulty with comprehension as well. So all of these are very much related, and we'll be definitely speaking more to this as we go along. But there were 5 areas that were identified. Again, phonemic awareness, phonics instruction, fluency instruction, vocabulary instruction, and comprehension. The 5 pillars, as they like to call them. But the big part about all of this is the National Reading Panel didn't just specifically look at with disabilities. These strategies work for all learners. All students to read. It's just a universal design for a learning principle. So a big part of this, many of you might be from schools where you're evaluating students for dyslexia or for a specific learning disability in the areas of reading and writing. More common than not, we find that people are waiting to evaluate students when they're noticing that these students are really struggling much earlier on. But I know that in places that I've worked, there tends to be a wait period, and finally around 3rd grade you start seeing referrals for students, and the student is really struggling to learn to read. We can't figure out necessarily why, they're just a little bit behind, but regardless, if a student is behind in reading, don't wait. Don't wait to evaluate that student and find out what is tripping them up with regards to learning how to read and be an effective reader. Overall, the biggest takeaway from this is there's no difference between children with reading disabilities who do or do not experience achievement discrepancies. That really, when it comes down to it, even if there's a small gap in learning how to read, all children make intervention. So waiting until first, second, 3rd grade can really be a detriment to a lot of students because so many of those foundational skills are learned very early on. So we don't want to widen those gaps. We want to close those gaps. So in reality, it doesn't fully matter what age you're looking at once they're in school, you want to make sure that if you're noticing a breakdown, intervene, get in there. Let's close those gaps. Don't wait for them to fail. So, starting intervention early, the Matthew effect. I don't know if anyone has seen this diagram before, but when you're thinking about reading skills and typical learners who are crack the code right away through instruction and the gains that they make in reading, they tend, you can see in the red part of that with foundational skills, they tend to fly. Their reading skills are solid, they're ready to move. Students who are struggling with reading, represented by that blue line, who are struggling with those foundational skills, they'll continue to see that gap widen between their peers, and reading will become more and more as they move along. So the Matthew effect, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. We want to close those gaps. That's a huge gap. So we want to make sure that students are gaining the foundational skills right off the bat. And being able to keep up and maintain those skills alongside their peers who crack that code more readily.
Thank you, Kelsey. And I'm just going to make everyone aware that for some reason my laptop is not connected to the webinar, but I can still see the presentation through my iPad, and I am trying to reconnect. So hopefully I'll get back onto some video here as well. And Kelsey, if you could hit the arrows to the right during my portions of it on the bottom of the screen there, just because I don't have access to that right now, and so that the people who are at CTD running this webinar know that I'm trying to connect again. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about No Child Left Behind and the Every Student Succeeds Act. So we know that now the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, has replaced No Child Left Behind. And so what does that mean when it comes to the instruction that you can provide for your students, and what does that mean in regards to specific instruction, as well as the funding for what's going to benefit all of your students and those who have dyslexia? So in this slide, we have a comparison between No Child Left Behind and Every Student Succeeds Act for those of you who may want more information in regards to the both acts and what the differences are, and what does this mean for you in regards to education. And this, of course, is U.S.-based for any of you who might be joining us from another country other than the U.S. And so you can see the differences here. I don't need to read all of them to you, but some of the biggest differences is that ESSA does cover preschool, pre-K, and No Child Left Behind did not. So this is really wonderful news, because as Kelsey mentioned, you can diagnose students young, and you want to diagnose students young, and you want to intervene young. You don't want to wait until there's such a gap that at 3rd or 4th grade you already have a student who does not want to go to school because of their reading or dyslexia, or their writing gap, or any of those things that would cause anxiety and stress and want that student, or make that student not want to attend school and not want to be a learner. And so we know that we can intervene early, and you want to be able to do that. The other great piece to ESSA is the funding and the choice. So the states have the autonomy to develop the interventions and to choose the interventions and the professionals that are going to be providing that. They have choice now, as well as the funding available to hire those professionals and to implement the technology, the assistive technology, and those professionals as well. So really be aware that you have more support now through the Every Student Succeeds Act.
And this is really critical for those of you who are working in schools and you're looking, to support students in a really specific way, especially in the area of reading. This is really critical. And we're going to talk a little bit about this in terms of when you're thinking about who do I hire. There's a lot of people out there who are certified for a variety of things. We've talked about Diana as an assistive technology professional, and she has gone through quite a bit of training and support to be able to obtain that certification. I myself am an Orton-Gillingham certified instructor, and I as well have gone through a lot of training to obtain that. And so when you're considering using this funding to hire people to provide these services to a really needy population of kids, we really want to make sure that the people that we hire are qualified. And so how do we do that? We have some examples here for you about what you might want to look for and consider. So I'm going to have Diana talk a little bit about the assistive technology professional.
Yeah, so certainly there is a certification for assistive technology. We put the information here as well as the website through the organization RESNA, R-E-S-N-A, Rehabilitative and Assistive Technology in North America. And you want to make sure that you are specifically asking the right questions about individuals, their credentials, their experience, whether or not they are certified versus a certificate or a few hours. What are their specialty areas? Where is their experience? In what types of environments? And this is all going to depend on the students that you're helping as well. But know that there are professionals and there is a certification, and it's important to look for those things when you're hiring individuals.
Absolutely. And the same goes for Orton-Gillingham certified instructors. There's a lot of laws legislature going through different states right now to ensure that individuals with dyslexia are identified early and that they're supported well throughout their academic careers. And to be able to provide Orton-Gillingham certified instruction, there's a variety of schooling you really have to go through. So one example right here of a program is through IMSLIC, Institute of Multisensory Instruction, and you can see on this chart how much support, 45 hours of coursework, 90 hours, depending on whether you're going for teaching, instructor, therapy, you're observed consistently. So there's a lot of programs out there certifying people for, Orton-Gillingham-based programs for Orton-Gillingham itself, and just making sure that you're hiring someone who's not just Orton-Gillingham trained, but Orton-Gillingham certified, because there's a big difference between that. You want to make sure that these students are getting really quality instruction, and that the person, because this is a prescribed program, being it's diagnostic in nature, being able to have enough knowledge to know where students are at as you're progressing through a multisensory program and what they need, and being able to diagnose that and prescribe appropriate instruction is very critical to their success. So these are major considerations. Ask these questions to people who you're looking to hire to support your students. Know what governing boards are involved and what their qualifications are to get those certifications. Understand who certifies their program. You can even ask people to come in and do a demo of the service. Ask for their credentials, certification, their experiences, references. These are all really, really important. 2 to 3 day certification programs, usually those are more training. They give background knowledge. They're not necessarily certifying an individual in a particular program, so I would be wary of those. We really want these students to have quality instruction so that we can see them succeed, because a lot of them are very bright students, and they could be put onto a really successful path.
And so now we're going to talk a little bit about the Common Core, those Common Core state standards. To dive in a little bit, there is a link here on this slide for you to get to a specific document regarding the Common Core state standards and how they support your students with disabilities, including those with dyslexia. And so whether or not you are a fan of the Common Core state standards, some of you have your own opinions of whether or not you like the Common Core state standards. Regardless of your opinion, this slide here highlights what the Common Core state standards are there for in regards to your students with disabilities and those with dyslexia. And so know that they do have the support for instructional support for learning based on the principles of universal design for learning. And we know that UDL supports our students with dyslexia in the multiple ways that you are engaging those students and allowing them to present information in multiple ways. And we think about their strengths in regards to audio and visual and kinesthetic and tactile. And so UDL principles and being able to use those types of instructional support is supported under the CTSS. And also, again, the flexibility in ways that information is presented by the instructor and by those educators who are trained. These educators that you want to be trained in UDL, who know how to engage all of their students, engage all of their learners, and reducing the barriers in their instruction by not just lecturing and not just providing text-based materials, but also providing multisensory, multimedia ways for those students to learn and really use their strengths to learn that information and to be able to present it in multiple ways as well. And certainly supports the appropriate accommodations. So in regards to the types of accommodations that we're going to talk about as we go through this presentation, and we will talk about the various accommodations that can support students with dyslexia, and Common Core state standards do support those accommodations, which one of them includes assistive technology. So again, CCSS does support the assistive technology devices and services to ensure access to the general education curriculum. And we know that there are many types of assistive technology, some of which we're going to be demonstrating later in the presentation for you, that do support students with dyslexia, and it's really good to note that Common Core supports that as well. And then this last bullet here for you to check out later, you do have access to this presentation now if you clicked on the link, as well as after the presentation. And there's a link there for a wonderful TED Talk called Noticeability.
Yeah, really great.
It is amazing, and if any of you have been moved by a TED Talk, you definitely want to check this out. And he has some great facts as well as inspirational information, and it's a wonderful TED Talk for you to check out. So the link's there for you to go back to at another time.
So just before we move on to more information about the Common Core, what I want to challenge you all to do is to kind of consider briefly what we went over in terms of the National Reading Panel, the 5 pillars that they found to be really critical in terms of instructional practices for teachers and for interventionists to tackle for students who are learning to read. Just because I want you to see if you make connections, and please talk about them in the chat. Make connections between what the National Reading Panel found, what we know about instruction, and how the Common Core is laid out, and you'll see that as we go through. So in looking at kindergarten right here, I'm going to kind of move through these 3 slides. I'm not going to read every single standard, but these are the ELA standards from the Common Core right in front of you. So recognize and produce rhyming words. Blend and segment odd sets and rhymes for single-syllable spoken words. You'll notice these bolded titles, phonological awareness. That's one section listed here. The next section is phonics and word recognition. So getting into grade level phonics skills, word analysis skills, being able to decode one-to-one letter sound correspondence. These are all kindergarten Common Core standards, things that you would teach in kindergarten. High frequency words, sight words, as they're commonly called. And then we get into fluency, right? Emergent reader text with purpose and understanding, students asking questions, kindergarten level. So thinking about those bolded titles, how do those relate to what the National Reading Panel found? These are really important connections to make because this is so critical for our readers who are struggling readers and could potentially have dyslexia. These foundational skills are what we found to be supporting students to make their reading skills, their foundational reading skills, solid. So the Common Core has aligned itself in some ways to the National Reading Panel's findings because they're tackling phonemic awareness and word study. They're tackling phonics and they're tackling fluency, and they're doing it in a systematic way, as we found is really critical to ensure that all students are being taught in a way that we know teaches them solid foundational skills. So, and it builds upon itself. So again, I mentioned earlier, here's the link for the full report. I think it's like almost 500 pages. So I also attached a link for the summary in case you don't have all of that time to read 500 pages. But I also want you to, if you have some time, look at first grade, second grade, third grade. All of the ELA standards are all laid out in this fashion. They tackle each of these areas. And that's so critical because it really gives a guideline to support teachers in creating their curriculums to match the needs of all learners. We know that all students can learn these lower order skills and build upon them to then reach higher order skills like reading comprehension. So very critical and something to think about. So feel free to talk about that a little bit. I know people have different feelings about the Common Core, but when we're thinking about how children learn to read and the way in which they learn to read, these are some really important connections to make. So overall, what does this mean for students with dyslexia? We talked about that a little bit, but really it means a lot. if we're kind of able to follow these developmental progressions for reading, things that we know as students move along and are learning those foundational skills, if teachers are instructing these skills in the general ed classroom, we're hoping that that gap doesn't have that chance to widen, and instead we'll see more of a closing of the gap. So although some students who experience reading-based disabilities, dyslexia, may still need additional support outside of the general ed classroom, that is totally possible because some students experience slower processing or have multiple disabilities. And that is okay, but if we're able to provide these students with significant support, not only in the classroom, but also additional support outside, and we're teaching students in this systematic way and making it fun for them, we're setting students up for success regardless of whether or not they experience a disability. So again, don't hesitate and don't wait. If you notice that a student that you're working with is struggling, that's the time to start to intervene, because all children and all students benefit from instruction in this area and intervention in the area of reading to be able to grow those skills. So don't wait.
And we're going to talk, of course, about considerations for IEPs, Individualized Education Plan, and personalizing learning for all students. And certainly the IEPs are what helps you to personalize learning for your students with dyslexia. And many other countries have their own version of a personalized learning plan for students with dyslexia or disabilities. And so in those plans, you want to consider specific accommodations, including assistive technology in the IEP. And we're going to talk more about that as we go along through the presentation and demonstration towards the end. But when we're thinking about accommodations in the IEP, there are 5 big ones. There are 5 big ones that you want to make sure in that IEP or personalized learning plan for your students with dyslexia. And we want to remember that when we are choosing accommodations for our students, that we are still holding high expectations for those students. That we know that when we have high expectations, that we have high achievement. And so we want to keep that in mind, that yes, we are providing accommodations for students for them to access the general curriculum and to succeed, and that we are going to make sure that we have high expectations from those students as well, because research has shown that that is going to help your students to succeed the most, is to make sure that you do have high expectations for those students. And so when we look at the first accommodation, the first of the 5 biggies, we do have assistive technology there because it is there as a significant support and accommodation for bridging that gap. So we're going to talk about the specific literacy instruction and reading instruction and writing instruction that is so critical to provide students with dyslexia to make sure that we are closing those gaps in literacy and getting them to the strongest, greatest, highest level of reading and writing that they are capable of doing. And certainly they are very capable if you start with that intervention early. But we also know that we want those students to be able to do the same activities, the same textbooks, be able to read the same textbooks at the same grade level as their peers. We want them to be able to access their worksheets and handouts and research on the internet. We want them to be able to access all of the curriculum and instruction that their peers have access to, and many times that's done by using assistive technology. And so text-to-speech, again, access to grade-level content and vocabulary. We do see those barriers to content knowledge. Comprehension, fluency, decoding text, decoding support for them, and certainly speech-to-text, reducing barriers for spelling errors, some of which can be found on these slides as I'm reading them. Reducing fine motor difficulty, if only I used my speech-to-text. And also encouraging the use of high-level vocabulary. So when we have support for writing such as speech-to-text or word prediction, which is the next one, and we will be showing examples of all of these, you're really supporting students to be able to use those words that when they hear them, they know what they mean. I always use the word photosynthesis as an example. A student hears that used by a teacher, they know what photosynthesis is, but if they go to write a paper or to do a project, they're not going to try and type or write that word because it would be very difficult for them. And so instead they just omit it, they leave it out. Whereas when they have the assistive technology to support them, they're going to use those high-level vocabulary words that they are capable of using and understand by having other means of presenting their knowledge. Also support with study skills and executive function for those students who struggle with organization, task initiation and management, scheduling and reminders, And so we want to make sure that we are supporting those things, sometimes with assistive technology, sometimes low tech, with graphic organizers, things like that. Note-taking support, really to support the independence for students who have other people taking notes for them. They can certainly be independent in taking notes with assistive technology, which supports their comprehension, processing, repetition of information, and especially retention. And most importantly, assistive technology helps provide access to AIM, that acronym, Accessible Educational Materials. Those are their textbooks, their worksheets, their handouts, those learning materials, all of those things that they legally have the right to access and fundamentally, of course, need to access the same as their peers. And that is done using assistive technology. And again, we're going to have some of those demonstrations coming up later in the presentation.
So another...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry. I was going to say there are some other biggies as far as accommodations that Kelsey's going to speak about.
Another really big one out of the 5 is pre-teaching, and I would also post-teaching of information. A lot of the students that I've worked with who experience dyslexia or reading-based disabilities really benefit from word study, going over grammatical concepts, vocabulary, that sentence sense, syntax, sentence structure, and understanding some of the complexities of those prior to diving into an activity or a reading. Especially thinking about assistive technology and having access to that, if a student doesn't, and many of students I've worked with previously hadn't, I often find vocabulary can be quite limited, just because a lot of these students have had such negative experiences around reading that they just don't. And that can really impact vocabulary for a lot of students who really have ideas and knowledge. So it's something to consider. Pre-teaching, and that's a great accommodation, and it can be really hard to do, so being able to navigate that and with regular education teachers, special education teachers, specialized tutors can be really helpful for students to make sure that they feel success going into something that could be quite challenging for them. Extended time is another one, and this is really a lot related to trying to process. A lot of these students are struggling to read information, comprehend information, partially because it's difficult for them to read it fluently and with ease. So many of these students find themselves reading and rereading and rereading. And so when you think about that with something, if they're given a packet of information, that can be dreadful for students. So they really need a lot of time to move through that material. And again, the use of assistive technology to support them with this can sometimes break that barrier as well. So extended time is a common one that you might see, but it's also really critical to make sure that our students feel success and they don't feel rushed, because that's when they start to fall apart. This can be on tests, on assignments. Working again with regular education teachers to be able to support them in making those texts or tests or quizzes accessible to students, and being able to allow them the time to work through whatever they need to be able to access them independently. So this is a big one, reducing the amount of problems. So thinking about how to work with students who have dyslexia, it's really important to consider not simplifying information. Many of these students don't need modifications to their learning. They need accommodation. They don't need the expectation of learning to change, but they might need a little bit less interviews at a time or more targeted questions to get at what you're asking. Offering word banks is often a great way to support students with dyslexia. And again, assistive technology to support especially in the area of math, this can be really challenging for a lot of our students. So it's just a huge caution to just consider looking for my students to know. Are you testing their reading, decoding, and fluency, or are you testing their knowledge? And so being able to work through that. Do we need to really, truly simplify this, or are they really understanding this, or do they have the capacity to really work through this material? And being really careful to not undermine their intelligence in that way, because a lot of these students have a lot to share and a lot to say, kind of like what Diana was talking about before. They're skipping over that word like photosynthesis because they might have a hard time reading it or spelling it, but in reality, they understand that concept just well if you were to allow them to take an oral exam. So This is very critical.
And then lastly, the fifth biggie as far as an accommodation in an IEP or personalized learning plan is that alternative representation. So again, looking at those UDL principles, universal design for learning, multiple means of engagement and expression. How else can knowledge be shown, and how do we build upon the strengths of all students? And again, these are interventions and assistive technologies and principles, as well as learning instruction that benefits all of your students and supports those with dyslexia and other disabilities to be engaged and learning all of the same knowledge that all of the teachers want the students to learn, certainly. But how can that knowledge be shown? So not only considering the instruction that's presented to students, not just a lecture and not just text-based materials, not just handing out worksheets to students or having them take notes based on a lecture, but how else can you be presenting to students to engage them using their strengths? If you're using audio and you're using visuals and you're using tactile materials for them to be really engaged in their learning. And then how can knowledge be shown? So how do your students then let you know that they have the knowledge that you want them to gain, that they have access to that knowledge and that they can show you what they know? And it doesn't always have to be writing an essay or taking a test. It can be a presentation, a multimedia presentation, a video. Students love to use technology, whether it's their phone or a tablet or other means to take videos, to do interviews. Art, so many of our students are creative, and there's so many ways for them to create art to demonstrate their knowledge. A poster, role-playing. We have a lot of great students who are interested in acting, and role-playing can be a really great way for them to show their knowledge. When you think of things, especially like when it comes to history and things like that, reenactments always engage us as we go and visit a reenactment and learn about things in history, and that's so engaging, and the students would be great at role-playing to show their knowledge. Verbal tests and answers, so you know that your students, again, they know what they want to be able to say, but maybe physically the act of handwriting is very difficult for them, whether it's fine motor, difficulty with grammar or spelling, and so allow them to give their answers verbally to you and have that conversation and that dialogue. Remember that you want it to be learner-centered, very personalized. What are they really inquisitive and want to learn about that is fit into the curriculum instruction that you're doing, and let that drive them. Let them want to be a learner. You need to remember that student choice and that student voice, and that you are allowing those students to really be engaged in their learning and be excited about it, and let them be excited about how they're going to learn it and how they're going to show that knowledge to you. If you have a lot of students sitting there with their heads on their desks or on their hands or falling asleep, and you're constantly saying, wake up, why are you so tired? Maybe you need to change up your instruction and really consider how those students learn best.
I also think it's really important to consider what the goal of that education is. Are you really working on, what do you want them to show you? Do you want them to show you a written essay? Is that how you have to have them give that answer or response to you? Or are they able to just show their knowledge in another way? What is the goal? Are you wanting to see their critical analysis, or are you wanting to see physically their writing? So being able to consider that as you're asking things of students, there's a time and place for all of that, but really being able to allow for that conversation to happen with teachers and with students, because all students, regardless of a disability, might learn in a different way or be able to show you something stronger of their knowledge.
Absolutely.
So kind of moving into more of the strategies for intervention and instruction, so really thinking about individuals who experience dyslexia. I hope some of you have been able to see this Scarborough's rope before. A lot of skills for reading, they're not, in a silo. They're interwoven together, and all of these foundational skills really lead into a strong, skilled reader, because we need them to be fluent and we need them to comprehend. That's the end goal. We read, comprehend, and share ideas and learn new ideas and learn new things. It can be really hard to be a fluent reader with solid comprehension skills if your foundation is really shaky. So if you picture a bridge and the pillars of the bridge are kind of pieces are missing, you're going to have a hard time getting over that bridge and really being able to get to the end of where you're trying to go. So when pieces are missing, that can be very challenging. So again, looking at these components of the rope that are really important and very challenging often for a lot of our students with dyslexia: language structures. syntax, sentence, semantics, word meaning, a lot of those. Phonological awareness, again, this is one of the deficit areas for individuals with dyslexia. Decoding skills, being able to read and take apart words, connect words together. Sight recognition, so words that often people will say they don't follow the rules. If you really want to be kind of a geek like me and get more into etymology and where words come from, you'll find that they often do follow some rule, but for the purpose of many of our students, we call them sight words, just to, because a lot of them don't follow the rules, but many of them do. Skilled readers, again, that fluent execution and increasing automaticity. So when readers are beginning to read, they tend to sound out every sound until they see those words frequently, and it becomes more fluid, and we're trying to constantly increase that automaticity. And all of these pieces that you see are so critical to getting a reader to become fluent and then be able to comprehend what they're reading and start thinking about what they're reading on a greater level. So again, we have lower order skills like phonemic awareness, phonics, and decoding, fluency, moving up to some higher order skills like vocabulary, semantics, words, and word meaning. And then comprehending what you're reading, because again, that's the end goal, to comprehend text and be able to share that with others and converse about it, share ideas. That's why we write and that's why we read. So moving from lower order skills to higher order skills, again, the National Reading Channel, what they found as really critical instruction for students, and then being able to look at how that relates to what we found in the Common Core and the connection between what the National Reading Channel found and the goal of the Common Core, and kind of providing that more systematic approach to introducing reading skills or foundational skills for reading. And again, looking at this, those lower order skills are critical in order to be able to reach the end goal. So when you're thinking about direct intervention, it's really important to consider what are the components of direct intervention that touch on all of those skills that we saw in the reading rope, Scarborough's rope, and considering the National Reading Channel findings. All of these 10 things are critical to make sure that you have in a lesson and that you're touching upon each of these tasks in one lesson in order to move students from one specific skill and generalizing that skill into longer passages for reading. So I am an Orton-Gillingham certified instructor. There's many programs that are Orton-Gillingham based. I know that we have attached a matrix, the Dyslexia Intervention and Assistive Technology matrix. At the end of that matrix, there's a variety of programs that I put in there that follow a multisensory approach to directly and explicitly teaching reading to individuals who struggle, but really for all students, a lot of them can benefit from these supports. And also I want to draw your attention to the bit.ly link at the bottom of this slide. Diana and I went through and did a mock Orton-Gillingham lesson for all of you. So if you click on that link, it will take you to a variety of videos in a Google Docs folder. And you'll be able to, if you have the time and desire, to go through the entire video or series of videos to see the progression of an Orton-Gillingham lesson and how specific, explicit, cumulative it is, and how we target each of these areas: phonogram drill, blending drill, sight words, guided discovery, new words, sentence reading, and going all the way up to controlled passage reading, and doing that one lesson. Usually this will take about an hour, and that's really critical to know that having 45 minutes to an hour to be able to do this is very difficult in schools, I know, but it's also critical to being able to see success in students. So we're just going to quickly go through, and again, so the last slide had a link to all of the videos. Each slide I go through has a link to a specific video that I'm referencing. So the first one is phonogram drill. A lot of these programs like Wilson, Fire, Blow the Code, a lot of the ones that I had listed in that matrix. If you click on that link for the matrix, you can see those at the bottom. They often have some sort of progression for this. So phonogram drill is sound symbol. You'll see in the picture right there, I'm showing cards to Diana, and we're going through, and she's giving me all the sounds she knows those those cards make. And the important thing here is that you're only targeting known concepts and that you're providing opportunity for discussion around those concepts. And it's a quick drill. That's why it's a drill. 2 to 3 minutes, no more, and you're targeting those challenges. And you'll see that Diana has a glitter pad in front of her, and that's that multisensory input that's so critical. Sometimes I have students writing in sand. I have students writing on the glitter pad. I have students writing using kinetic sand, Play-Doh, all sorts of things to be able to put to get extra input as they're making those letters while they're saying the sound out loud. So again, you can click on that link to see the whole video. Another component is the blending drill. So right after I went through those cards, you'll see there's a series of cards in front of me. I'm flipping those cards over, and she's able to decode and read through each word. A lot of them are nonsense words because I'm flipping cards over. But this is really important, again, only known concepts because this is cumulative, okay? And you're only building upon skills they know and introducing one new skill at a time, or reviewing one skill at a time. Or one new skill at a time, and then you're constantly embedding review from previous lessons. So, and you're usually trying to target things that were tricky so that you're able to solidify that for students. So we're blending in this one, working on automaticity. Review words, so always there's a review component to solid lessons that are explicit and systematic in nature. We try to, I know how I was trained, 15 to 20 words, review words, and you're working on fluency too, so you're also timing these students and working through and talking about, drawing attention to errors that they make and using the rules that they've learned to remediate some of those challenges. So I use highlighters frequently, and I know my students really, really, really love erasable highlighters because when they make mistakes, they don't like it to stay there. They also really just enjoy the fact that you can erase a highlighter. So anything fun that you can incorporate into that is really critical. You'll see that I'm holding up this kind of wood block. It actually comes apart. I use this for prefixes and suffixes as well. So you can write right on it and erase it. And students really love it when you're talking about onset rhyme, being able to show blends. This is a time for you to review concepts that weren't stable, and you're constantly doing that. This is very systematic. Then we have sight words, learned words, however you want to call them. Frequently come from the Fry list, the Dolch list. I use phonetic analysis to look at these words, really tearing apart so for example, the word word, right? OR usually says or, but in this one it's saying So thinking about and drawing attention to that for students, and then having them use multisensory approaches to write in sand, to build those words with Play-Doh, whatever, put them in shaving cream. Skywrite, use their armed growth motor skills and get them writing those words and those letters and sounds in the sky. Plenty of opportunities for practice is so important too. So they might need to see these words frequently, and often my students will master these words reading but really struggle with them writing. So phonetic analysis is really excellent for that. Guide discovery, this is the meat of your lesson. So you'll see in the video that Diana and I did, we were doing a review concept, so it won't be a true guided discovery lesson, but you'll be able to kind of see, I talk a little bit about that in that video if you click on that bit.ly link. But this is really important because you're guiding the student to discovering what their new concept is for that day. You're only instructing on one new concept, and they're very specific in how they're introduced. So you're allowing students to ask questions. You're asking questions to students to guide their understanding and to get them to auditorily hear a new sound and think about that sound, to visually see and explore a new sound, and then you're going through an explanation process with them. And a lot of them will discover what the new concept is on their own and have some really interesting things to say about it. So this portion of the lesson, instead of just telling a student, this is what we're doing, makes it so much more meaningful for them. And they make these really strong connections, and that makes it really hard for them to forget. And then you're moving on from there, and you're giving them plenty of opportunity for practice in the remainder of your lesson. So sometimes it's not a new concept that you're providing guided discovery for. Sometimes it is a review concept, and that's okay because, again, this is diagnostic and prescriptive in nature. If you notice that you have a student who's not ready to move on to a new concept, then you need to do some review, and you need to be able to recognize that and have that training enough to know we're not ready to move on because this isn't solid. And if we know that if we move on, the shaky pillars of our bridge aren't going to be able to hold up that student to be able to be a fluent reader. So we really want to make those pillars solid. Then we move on to new words. So these words all incorporate that new concept. And again, your timing for fluency. Although I will caution, some students really struggle with rapid naming, being able to retrieve sound symbol. And for some students, I don't time them in this regard because it can be very stressful for them, and they're almost spending too much time focused on that fluency aspect. So if I'm really trying to get their decoding solid, sometimes I'll forego the fluency, whereas other students are absolutely in love with that aspect of it, and they love to see their time increase or decrease. So that kind of will depend on your student. But again, if you're targeting fluency, that's going to be really important. And again, you're drawing attention to those errors. And a lot of times students don't mind, in my experience, seeing those and correcting those because they have so much knowledge at this point that a lot of people don't. And they have a way that they can talk about words and think about words that they didn't before. And a lot of them see success with this. So not thinking about it as that you're constantly drawing attention to their errors and that they might feel badly about it. And I've seen quite the contrary for a lot of my students. And then finally, if you're seeing, we started at the very beginning with sound symbol, and now we're all the way up to sentence reading. This is important that you go through an entire lesson in one sitting and you're not breaking lessons up or removing parts of lessons. All of these parts are really critical, which is why it's critical to have enough time to execute these lessons appropriately. But we're already up at sentence reading now. So all of these sentences that they're practicing have the new concepts, but are also including old concepts as well, because again, you're trying to make sure that those are solid and they're recognizing those concepts in connected text as well. So again, you're drawing attention, you're doing fluency if it's appropriate. This is for older students sometimes who are learning more about morphology, word meaning. Sometimes I forego fluency and focus instead on phrasing and thinking about, which is actually a part of fluency, but thinking about how they sound when they read and thinking about thinking. And that's important too, and you'll kind of be able to feel that out as you're working with students. Phonemic and morphological awareness. So you'll see I have on the table in front of Diana that picture blocks from the lips and the Linda Mood Bell phoneme sequencing program, which is also referenced in that matrix at the very end. But you'll notice that Diana has her finger and she's pointing, she's tapping out sounds. You notice there's no letters, so I could have given her the word cat, and she was tapping out all the sounds she was hearing, cat, so cat, and then we're manipulating that. So it's not phonics-based, there are no letters involved in this. It's all auditory, and it allows you to manipulate sounds or parts of words. So roots, prefixes, suffixes, Greek combining forms, all of these things. And this aids the student in being able to hear and think about words as they're put together or taken apart. And then as students get older, they're really doing this more for morphology, so words, word meaning, taking and modifying roots, prefixes, and suffixes. And it gets really interesting to see how students process this, but those blocks, for a lot of our students, students blocks or some sort of manipulative to be able to help them visualize how many sounds they hear or parts of a word that they hear can be really helpful because it's a lot to hold in memory, and sometimes memory and that rapid naming is affected in our students. We're almost at the end of what a typical lesson plan would look like. So the beginning part is heavy on reading. The end part of the lesson focuses more on encoding or writing. So you start with sound symbols, so you provide a sound, and they're writing the letter that corresponds to that sound, or sometimes they would say a prefix, and they'll write the prefix down. Then you move up to the word level. You'll have new words because you started a new concept today. And in Orton-Gillingham, we use tapping. A lot of programs use tapping. Wilson uses tapping. Wilson is Orton-Gillingham based. So you'll see in the first picture, I have my hand up. and we tap out every finger gets one sound. So that helps students to work on their encoding skills so that they know, oh, I heard this sound and this sound is connected to this letter. So they tap out the sounds and then they tap out the letters that correspond to those sounds. And that really helps them before they then go to write on the paper. So you're trying to do it errorless if possible. Then you're also moving on to review words and then cite words, those learned words. And then you're moving on to sentence writing. And these are all really important in being able to make sure that students get experience with sounds, with symbols, with words, and in more of a connected text. And then finally, at the end of the lesson, the last thing that you'll be doing is controlled passage reading. So this is really, depending on your student, the student that Diana was a student in the very beginning levels of Orton-Gillingham, so her passage is quite short because you only want to include concepts that they've learned. So in this lesson that you'll see, we were looking at digraphs, so two letters that come together and make one sound, for example, like SH. So her passage is quite short because at that point we'd only covered so much material. So as students move along, their passages become lengthier and lengthier. So I said here it's a heavy emphasis on new concepts, although some of these words will include review concepts. But often if you find a passage for students to read, you don't want them to have more than 5 words that are unknown based on the rules that they've learned, because then you'll frequently find they'll be rather disfluent, and that could be at a frustration level for them. And then, of course, the end goal of reading is always comprehension. So when you're thinking about reading passages, you always want to follow up with comprehension questions. And I always ask questions that are more analytical in nature, require going back into the text to consider those answers, some explicit and some implicit, and that really helps students to be able to navigate, oh, I have to think about what I'm reading while I'm reading, because that's maybe not something that they've experienced because reading has been such a challenge. So those are, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to say prior to moving on to the making connections, I just wanted to emphasize that each one of those slides, as Kelsey mentioned, has the video that goes along with her explanation, and they're really great videos if you want to see the specific instruction that is involved in Orton-Gillingham, because it really is, it really contains all of those things that we spoke about as far as personalized and specific, and all of the components that Kelsey mentioned in the videos are really great if you want to check those out afterwards. You have them as links in the presentation to click on and check them out, and also the multisensory piece that, as I was in the lesson myself and really had previous experience from providing support in my previous years in special education and providing the support for students who are using OG programs, but it has been so long, several years, and just realized again how much the multisensory piece is so great, and with the blocks and the sandpaper that I was touching and all of the different ways that I was engaged in learning, I think that it's just such a great component of the Orton-Gillingham instruction, is that it's not just reading and writing, but all of the components, especially the multisensory, the kinesthetic, and that tactile.
Yes, and I do want to say I did see a question around how long should a lesson be, and I just want to say that Orton-Gillingham lessons or programs that are Orton-Gillingham based usually run about an hour, 50 minutes, and that can be really challenging in schools, but this is where the advocacy comes in for your time with students, and being able to navigate that. It's really important that you're able to get through an entire lesson in one sitting, because you're moving from lower order skills to higher order skills, so they can see the progression of that concept that you're instructing as a whole. So I've advocated in schools I've been in, I need at least 45 minutes with my students. That's very critical. And so again, with the new legislation that's going through, hopefully that will be able to support some schools with being able to access providers to be able to do that. So about 50 minutes is a typical lesson, and upwards of an hour being Gillingham lessons will end with 10 minutes of book reading. So that's usually what is appropriate. And again, you don't want to split these lessons up. Okay, so making those connections. We've talked a lot about foundational skills needed for reading. We've talked a lot about research that the National Reading Panel has found. I encourage you to look over some of those documents. We know what works for struggling learners, and we know that what works for struggling learners also works for skilled readers. These are all really critical things to think about if you're in a school and you're trying to support struggling readers. So again, I suggest make sure you get trained, provide training in your district. It can be really hard, but it's critical. So, moving on.
Absolutely. Moving on to the fun part, the demonstrations. And so as mentioned, we do have assistive technology demonstrations for you this evening. And what goes along with those demonstrations is the AT and intervention matrix handout. I know Jackie put a link to it in the chat as well. And when I start sharing my screen, I'll explain that matrix a little bit more as well. But it is broken down into the apps and assistive technologies that we're going to show you this evening between Google and iOS. And I'm going to start, and then I will be sharing my screen to show you things on my laptop as well as on my iPad. And then we will move over to Kelsey, and she will be demonstrating some assistive technologies as well before we finish out with the rest of the slides on the presentation. And we will be taking your questions at the end in the chat as well. It's great for you to be communicating with us in there this evening. So we will begin to share our screen, and I will start with my laptop as soon as I see the share my screen option here. It's just popping up for me from our host. Thanks so much. There we go. And so I'm going to start by sharing my desktop with you. And hopefully everyone can see that all right. If we're connected there. Kelsey, you see that okay, yes?
Yep, I do that.
Great, okay. So what we're going to start with is some Google Chrome apps and extensions. So there are certainly many free and low-cost ways for you to be able to provide various assistive technologies for your students to start supporting them immediately for things that they may need support with, including literacy and also subject-based. And so you can see on my screen here I have several Google apps that are downloaded, similar to downloading apps on a tablet, but when you are downloading apps from Google, you are going to the Google Chrome Web Store, which is this icon here, the little beach ball and the beach bag. You can only download these apps in Google Chrome. That's the browser I'm in that looks like the little beach ball. It's different from your other browsers that you would get onto the internet with. So you won't find the web store in Internet Explorer or Firefox or Safari. You need to be in Chrome. And this web store has so many wonderful educational apps and extensions for students. I encourage you to search for the feature that they need, whether it's text-to-speech, organization, mind mapping and brainstorming, digital schedules and reminders. There's so many here, and 99% of them free, some of them low cost and then subscription-based, but it lets you know, so you're not spending money without knowing it. And your extensions show up as little icons to the top right of your browser, so where my mouse is hovered now. And that's the reason why they're up there is because they're an extension of your browser. So they're typically going to affect the website that you're on, which you're going to see throughout some of my demonstrations here. And so again, on that app matrix, if we go to it here, you'll notice that we broke it down by iPad apps and accessibility, which I'll be doing second. So those are on the top. So if you're following along with me, hopefully I'm not making you dizzy here, the Chrome apps and extensions are the second section here. And so I won't be able to show all of the apps or extensions, nor will Kelsey, but this wonderful matrix you have access to go back to later. If you click on the link, it will bring you right to the app or the extension. We have specifically what that addresses as far as the skills, the need, and then also our comments about why we put that particular app or extension on our matrix. And then at the very bottom of the matrix are your multisensory phonics-based literacy programs and resources for you to get to as well. So we're kind of starting in the middle of the document just because I'm on my laptop and that's the easiest place to start. And so you see Read and Write for Google is one of those extensions that we do recommend. There are certainly free extensions for text-to-speech to have information read out loud if the student is on the internet or in a Google Doc. And there are free extensions to do some of the other features of this particular extension. But if you have a student with multiple needs, it's nice to have it all in one toolbar. And Read and Write for Google provides that as this little icon here, that little puzzle piece. And so while I'm in the internet, first of all, this toolbar will work for me. It will also work in Google Docs, which many students are using now, and it works with PDF, those handouts and worksheets that students need access to in order to complete them when you do offer them handouts to read or worksheets to complete. This toolbar works for them as well. And so one of the first options is that text-to-speech. I'm going to first unmute my laptop so that you are able to hear this. And it's the hover speech icon, and then I just move my mouse where I want it to begin reading, and it does highlight while it reads aloud.
Aristotle was born in Stagira in North Greece, the son of Nicomedes, the court physician to the Macedonian royal family. He was trained first in medicine.
So you can see that text-to-speech has come a long way. It's a very pleasant sounding voice. It's not robotic. This is access to grade level content for their books, their handouts, their worksheets, research material. They're certainly going to be doing papers and projects that need to research. And you can see that in the settings, you can slow that voice down. You can speed it up. You can change the voices. And you have many options for turning the features on or off this toolbar as well. I'm just going to click a refresh here. And so knowing that you have the option for text-to-speech for your students in all environments, as well as some of the other features that I'm going to point out regarding to students with dyslexia that can support them. And so one of the other features is the dictation speech input and word prediction. I'm going to show both of those features in a Google Doc, but really good to know that it's also available when they're on the internet. And why is that? Because college applications are online, job applications are online. Those things that they're going to need to fill in, and they can use their voice or word prediction in order to help their spelling and their grammar while they're doing those things is awesome. So it's great to know that those features are also available here, and I am going to demonstrate them in a Google Doc. And then these highlighters, so the 4 different colored highlighters. So when your student's researching, just like you would use a highlighter on a paper or in a book to highlight important information, typically they're going to read and try and pick out important information. Those two skills combined can be very difficult for someone with dyslexia. So they can listen to the information first and say, aha, that is definitely something important that I want in my paper or my project, and now I'm going to highlight it. And they can use just one color if they choose to highlight in just one color, but these different colors are really great for categorizing and organization. Maybe all important dates are going to be in blue, and all important characters are going to be in yellow. Or they're comparing one country to another, and they're going to use one color for each country. It's really wonderful when it comes to organization piece for these students. And now we can collect our highlights, and we can order them by color or in the order that we took them. If we order them by color, they put our yellows together, our blues together, etc. So we categorize, and now we have those categories organized for us by color. And at the bottom of the document, you see that it exports to a Google Doc, which many students are using in school now. Instead of Word docs, they're using Google Docs for so many great reasons. That's a whole other training for Google. But you see here you have the highlight, and you have the link to get right back to the website or the resource where they got these highlights. So what's great about these extensions and these apps is that they follow the student Google login. So this student could be using this tool as they are logged into a desktop computer at school in a lab, or a laptop or a Chromebook at school, and then they shut down and they go home and they log into their Google, and all of these documents are there and all these tools are there to support them, and they can get right back to this resource just by opening this document and get back to where they were researching previously. They don't need to have the same device going back and forth with them. There are many other specifics about the tools on this toolbar that can be beneficial to students with dyslexia, including the simplify page. So many times your students are going to a website, and what's the first thing that happens? A video starts playing or an ad, and it's distracting them. And now they want to buy the latest video game instead of reading the article that they were supposed to be reading. And so the simplify page is really great. Again, there's many other free apps and extensions listed in that matrix that do this, like readability. So if you want all separate apps and extensions that do these features, you certainly can find that. This is if you want all these things in one toolbar. And so you see now it simplifies this information. It gets rid of those videos and those ads and those distractions. You can still listen to it out loud, and you can simplify the information even further. It doesn't summarize it. It simply takes the important facts, the same facts that are in that article, and simplifies it for less information on the page. but there are apps and extensions for summarizing and leveling text. So check that out if you go into the App Store. And it did open in a separate window, so they can get back to the website that they were on. And now, as I mentioned, the toolbar does work in a Google Doc, so I'm just going to get rid of the information in this particular Google Doc. And turn off my highlighter there. We don't need the highlights right now. So as I mentioned, if they are writing a paper or an essay, there are a couple of tools in the toolbar that can support them with the writing process as well. If educators and instructors are sharing worksheets or handouts as a Google Doc, for example, they'll be able to use this toolbar. If you already have documents on your computer that are not a Google Doc, you simply bring them into your Google Drive and you can convert it very easily. So don't think you have to reinvent worksheets, handouts, lessons you already have. It's a very easy conversion if you want it to work in Google, very fast. And now the toolbar is here, and you can simply click on word prediction, for example. And now while I'm typing, you can see that it is predicting what I may be trying to type. And this is predicting phonetically and contextually. Phonetically, what may I be trying to type that could be difficult to spell? And also contextually, if I start writing about paleontology, words about paleontology are going to populate. If I start writing about baseball, baseball words start to populate. And again, for a student with dyslexia, some of these words might be difficult for them to read, and they don't know which one they want. So they take their mouse and hover over the word, and they can listen.
Typically. Typified. Typing.
And they click on that word to put into their document. Certainly speeds up typing, helps to reduce spelling areas. Again, we're reducing those barriers. That is exactly what you want to do, is reduce the barriers. And now the other option is the speech input. So other individuals were talking about speech input and dictation earlier in the chat. Certainly the training to use dictation is important. You want to train students to speak loud, articulate when they can, to speak in words and phrases, and practice with something fun, something that they are excited to talk about. Don't start with something academic. Just watch them, watch them get their words on the page easily and avoid spelling errors, and then work from there. And this does certainly work very accurately and efficiently with some of your students who may have a speech impairment. It does get better each time they use it. So I'm going to click on the icon, which is the little microphone headset. Now I can begin typing using my voice and say things like photosynthesis or phlebotomy without worrying about spelling periods. I'm going to the store today period. Do you need anything ? You can say your punctuation or you can insert it manually. And you can see that immediately, without any training or creating a voice profile of any kind, this tool starts working for students. So it takes training on how to use it, speaking their sentences, and if you do have a student with dyslexia that also has a speech impairment, this really encourages a lot of my student and adult clients to speak more clearly, especially when they see how much it saves time and how much it helps them with the writing process. And now, of course, the speech input is available on tablets and other devices as well. So really think about the tools that are going to support that learner. And then, as I mentioned, there are a few other tools like voice notes. Voice notes really great. Typically, teachers are leaving comments for students using this little option over here to the right. They can comment on students' work. So if they received a paper from a student and they are making comments to give back to the student, they could type a comment here, and then the student sees that comment. Maybe it says, maybe you can add more adjectives, or what are you trying to clarify here, things like that. But for some students, those comments might be difficult for them to read. And sometimes when you type a comment, a student with dyslexia might take it the way you didn't mean it, because we don't use emojis with our typing our comments. Maybe you could use more adjectives. They might think their sentence isn't good enough, or they can't read your comment. So you can leave voice notes. I like what you did here. Maybe you could add a few more adjectives for description. You can insert the voice comments. And now again, the students get these comments no matter where they are, if they're at home, if they're in class, or if they're in the library. They can use this with earbuds certainly, but they're going to get these comments from you verbally. It's just taking a second to insert it here. And then they're able to go right here and listen to that comment that you left. I like what you did here. Maybe you could add a few more adjectives for description. I love the little repetitive part there from my technology. And so they can listen to those voice notes. And I have a lot of students, as you know, they can collaborate on Google Docs together. They can be working on Google Docs at the same time from different places, and they can leave voice notes for each other. So it's a really great collaborative tool. And as I mentioned, it does also work in PDF worksheets as well. So you can see that I pulled up my dyslexia presentation here, and I'm just going to get to a PDF worksheet that I have in my Google Drive. And so if your student has a worksheet that's in PDF format, most scanners that you have scan to PDF. Sometimes you're emailing it to yourself. You can send it to the student. They can save it in their Drive. If you're already using Google Drive, you share it to their Drive. And there is a great app called Snapverter from the same company that makes Read and Write that will allow you to take a picture of a worksheet. It does the OCR optical character recognition, and you're able to use it with this toolbar. It pulls into the Read and Write toolbar automatically, so it's really awesome. So see that you have the toolbar here. It looks a little bit differently. You can have this worksheet read out loud for students who need the directions read out loud to them. They don't need to wait for a person to do this.
Read each passage and ask yourself, what is the author doing in this paragraph?
And then also the options to type. So click on the T, put that cursor where you want to begin typing, and now I could start using word prediction to type into this worksheet. And you can see that the box will appear, and same thing, I can listen to it out loud. Click on it, or I can use speech input. I'm going to turn off my word prediction. I'm going to use my speech input here, allow my microphone, speak my answer. And I can listen to this out loud first to make sure it says what I want it to before approving it.
In my mind, speak my answer.
So I would definitely hear a mistake. I could delete it, or I can choose to approve it. And I can delete it anytime. I can go back and get rid of comments as well. The highlighters are here, dictionary for definition, just like on the internet. There's so many features embedded in this toolbar that work in all environments. They're a really supportive tool, a really supportive extension. And as I mentioned, there are other extensions to annotate PDFs, for text-to-speech, for word prediction, all of those things. There's many other options for extensions. This is one that has it all in one. But know that if you're searching that Google Chrome web store for those features, you're going to find tools, extensions, and apps to support your learner. I mentioned a few others. Such as, I'm going to get rid of Read and Write here, such as Grammarly. Grammarly is free. It works great. If you want to purchase a subscription, you can, but the free version works wonderful for supporting students, again, while they're typing on the internet, whether it's social media and they're supporting talking and socializing with their friends, or if it's in email, Gmail, or if it's in a form that they're filling out, again, a application or an interview or college application or job application, that Grammarly is going to pop up and help them make corrections. It pops up for me all the time when I'm in email and works way faster than my typical spell check. Helps me to make corrections on the fly. So again, universal design, it's great for everyone, but for your students who struggle with grammar and spelling, Grammarly is a great extension. Another one that I mentioned is called Visor. Visor is really great, another free extension for screen masking. So for your students who have a difficult time with, let me just refresh this here and make sure that it's activated. There we go. I stopped it before I could show it. So with Visor, you can choose the different colors that you can use. And you know that a lot of your students with dyslexia prefer a specific color background while they're reading, and also the ability to track, and you can change the size of the window. You can lighten it or darken it, so this follows their mouse. So you can see it's tracking, helping them to keep track. A lot of students with dyslexia have trouble as far as their eyes bouncing back up and in between, or up to the next or the previous line and so forth. And so tracking can be really positive tool for them to be able to use, and you can turn this off very quickly and easily as well. So again, because of considering time, we have a lot of iPad apps to show you, myself and Kelsey, and accessibility features. So please refer back to that matrix, because we certainly can't show you all of the wonderful Chrome apps and extensions, but there really are a lot listed here for you to get back to and click on the link and check those out and read what it's all about. Timers and digital agendas and organization, note-taking, a lot of great things there. So check those out. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start my air server to show you my iPad screen. So I am connecting my iPad to my laptop so that I can mirror my iPad and have you be able to see. In just a minute here, hopefully we'll get it going. And then you'll be able to see the apps and the features of the iPad that I want to show you this evening. There we go. Okay, so now you're able to see my iPad screen. Oops. All right, and so built into the iPad and iOS devices, those iPhones, iPod Touches, iPad, any size, iPad mini, iPad Pro, the large ones now that are great, you have accessibility settings, and most people don't know about these settings. Your phone can do so much more than text or make a call. For any of you who still use it to make a call. But a lot of times you're not aware of the settings that are built in that can really help support your learner and so or yourself. And so in your settings, on the left-hand side, I'm on General. On the right-hand side, I'm on Accessibility. There are really a lot of great accessibility features here to check out, but I want you to really be aware of the fifth one down, which is called Speech. This is turned off by default. You have to go in here and turn it on. And it's not VoiceOver, which is the first one. It doesn't speak everything out loud. This is going to speak out the selection of text that you or your student chooses. So when they get to a website or they get to an email or a text message or any place on the iPad or iOS device that they need to have that information read out loud, they're going to be able to do so, but you have to turn this on. You can change speaking rate. You can have the content highlighted. And then when they do get to a website where they need that information read out loud to them, I'm just opening up a website, for example. Two ways to do that. You can press and hold, as the R.J. Cooper stand, one of my favorite websites. So you can press and hold and move these little bookmarks, and then you see the word speak is the third option. Have this speak out loud.
Exactly what is needed. The big issue is the stability
and then the other option is a two-finger swipe down. And then you see this.
This is my new holding tablet stand, which super builds.
So now you see the toolbar appears, and they have the option of playing something out loud, rewinding, fast forward, slowing it down, docking it, taking it out as they need to. So make sure you turn on that feature for your students who need that text-to-speech. It's a really powerful feature built into your devices before you add any apps. One of the main apps that I talk about for students with dyslexia is called Voice Dream Reader. If you haven't heard about Voice Dream Reader, it's a really incredible app that does so much and really so many features for your students with dyslexia. This is the colors that a previous student chose. You can pull in books from Bookshare, a free resource in many countries for students with print disabilities, access to math, science, reading, social studies, chapter books, novels, things they're going to use for research. And you see here you can get things from Google Drive or Dropbox if you're using that. Worksheets, handouts, books. This is access to their accessible instructional materials using this app. $9.99. I just opened up a book. You can see that I can change the speech rate faster or slower. I can add voices, and there's so many voices here with different accents, child voices, adult voices, really pleasant sounding voices. The text settings are incredible. The fonts and the spacing. Increase the text size. Make less on the page. Add spaces between the characters and the lines. Really open up that text. And the font. You can change the font style of any book, any handout or worksheet, including to the dyslexia font if you have a student that responds positively to that particular font, but many other fonts here that some students with dyslexia or adults prefer. And so you can see that you can change the text. And then you can also go into the color settings. You could just choose their light or dark, nice to have high contrast, or custom colors, where again, you can choose the color background, the spoken word, the spoken line. All of this is customizable. You move that dot. You have the lighter or darker on that page. The text-to-speech, certainly. Oh, suddenly my volume is not on. There we go. So they can have that information read out loud. And then something that's really great, a couple of great features. You can change the speed, as I mentioned, but some students, it's not slow enough. The app developer just added finger reading speed. So under the reading mode, if you go to finger reading, it's literally as they point to the word that it's going to read to them, which is awesome. And then also, you can choose under the font settings at the bottom, you can choose screen masking, or you can choose Pac-Man mode. This is recently added after research by the app developer with Harvard. and MIT in regards to students increasing comprehension and fluency by having the words disappear after they're read out loud. So check out Pac-Man mode.
Freak says, I'll bet you anything she's a damsel in distress, which, as it turns out,
so notice that the words disappear after they're read, but you can get right back to them if you need to review. You can create sticky notes, highlights, etc. There's so much here. Get definitions. It's really a phenomenal app for access to text. You can see here I took some highlights and some sticky notes that are audio for your students. Really incredible app to consider. And the next one I want to show you before passing over to Kelsey again, we don't have time to show all of the apps, but I want to make sure I hit some key apps that are really critical, including Claro PDF. So this is Claro PDF. It is on your handout. You can pull worksheets or handouts in from Google Drive, or you can take a photo of the worksheet and work on it immediately, because this app, for about $6, converts it. It does the OCR, convert that PDF, and then what are you able to do? You're able to annotate it. You can listen to it out loud. You see the play button. You can have that information read out loud, and you can handwrite. So if this is math or another type of worksheet or handout, you can certainly do math. You could do handwriting. This is very messy at this angle. You can certainly erase if you make a mistake. You can type into here, and now the world is open to your students. They can type using the on-screen keyboard. They can use their voice with this microphone built in, speak my words, or pull in a third-party keyboard. If you're not aware, you can download third-party keyboards from the App Store. I like the one called Read and Write for word prediction specifically. I'm just going to get to it here because I have about 7 downloaded on my iPad. And getting through to the Read and Write, which is color-coded vowels. You can have the Dyslexia font, and it does the word prediction. So while I'm typing, it predicts, and I can listen to that word out loud, and then click on it to put into my document.
Word.
So really powerful tools here to help your students. They can save this to Google Drive, share it with the teacher, email it, print it. Nothing is stuck on the iPad when you completed it. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to Kelsey because she has some other phenomenal apps to show you as well.
Okay, so some of the apps that I'm going to show you are more intervention-driven. Again, so I use these supplemental to Oregon Gillingham instruction that I provide. So I'm going to share my screen now and connect you all. Okay. So, can you see that, Diana?
Not yet, it's coming.
Okay.
But there we go. I see it now.
Okay. So the first one that I want to show you is called Speech Flipbook. This is by Practice Therapy. And the good thing about this is, so when you're thinking about an Oregon Gillingham lesson plan, when I went through the blending drill, this is kind of an electronic blending drill. So I'm going to use my finger to click start. And then you'll see it has a series of sounds up here, kind of like in a flip chart. And then you can click on each one, and it will make the sound. And students can sound out those nonsense words, or sometimes they come up as real words. And then I'll use my finger to flip the chart. And then you can do it again with students. So you can see at the bottom of this screen here, you'll have initial sounds. So if you click on that tab with your finger, you can choose what sounds come at the beginning of a word. So you'll see I have all digraphs here. Diana and I, in our mock lesson for all of you, we're targeting digraphs. And then you have initial clusters, so blend, vowel sounds. You can choose, again, which types of vowel sounds you want to target, final sounds, and final clusters. So in the lesson, again, that Diana and I went through, we were targeting digraphs and blends, initial and final blends. And you can customize this to focus on the specific sounds your students are working on. So again, that speech flip book, pretty cool. I encourage you to check it out. You can embed this right in therapy. It definitely keeps students engaged. So another one I have to show you is the Oregon Gillingham deck of cards. This is by Meyerson Academy. So the very first drill that I did was the phonogram drill. And you can see here it has a symbol on the screen, so the letter C is represented. And above it, it says 1/2, so 1 out of 2. The great thing about this deck is that it provides every way that a letter would make a sound. So we know that C can say hard C or soft C. So this app allows you to go through and do a drill, a phonogram drill, with students electronically, and you can even see what how the sound is made by clicking on videos.
Hard C, cat.
So it provides videos. I think that might have been sideways for you guys. I'm sorry if it was. You can also check keywords, the sound, and the letter name. So this is another way to embed a phonogram drill. So the last one that I want to show you is, where are we? Sound literacy. So you'll see here I can choose myself as a student. If anyone's familiar with the Linda Mood Bell phoneme sequencing program, this is essentially part of that in an app. Again, sound literacy is what this is, has the upside down E or the schwa symbol. And the cool thing about this is you can run, this is what Diana and I were doing in our lesson for you all, the phonemic awareness task. And this also allows for morphological awareness too, because you'll see across the top, you have, I'm touching this with my finger, you have access to the alphabet, you have access to consonant teams, so digraph as well in here, trigraph, silent letters, all of these, the floss rule, it's all in there. Vowel teams, these are all in here as well. Endings and rhymes, those welded sounds, prefixes, suffixes, and base words. So this covers levels 1 through 5 in Norton Gillingham. You could use and manipulate all of these based on where a student is at. And then, of course, just being able to work on phonemic awareness. So if I have the word cat, I have 3 blocks. Ah. They each represent a sound. And so if I were to say, this says cat, make it say that, the student would say, ah. And then, b, ah. And then they could make that change really easily and build those phonemic awareness skills. So those are some really great apps, and then building up to morphological awareness as well. So if you're looking at prefixes, suffixes, and base words, you can kind of combine some of those. So you could have, let's find a good one, subject, for is subjective. So you can play around with words, you can build words, you can talk about morphology words and word meaning. And then you can also alter words, subjective to subject. So you can play with that in this app. So again, that was sound literacy. The other one I showed you, OG card deck and speech flipbook. So I am going to stop sharing my screen. Bring it back to Diana. Okay.
Sorry, I just realized I said that entire sentence while I was on mute. So thanks for hanging in there with us. We're going to get back to our slideshow presentation, just the last couple bit of slides. If you're staying late, thanks for hanging in there. And if not, this recording later on CTD, as we mentioned. And so we'll just finish up here with the last couple of slides. Again, remember, you want to unlock that brilliant dyslexic mind and let them shine. Build upon their strengths and their talents. And that includes personalized learning, high expectation, positive support, accessible instruction. High achievement is going to be gained by using all of these things, and remember to include that student voice and choice. And the best combination is that direct intervention and assistive technology.
So it's really critical. Again, I want to bring this back to the pillars of the National Reading Panel. What did they find is important? You're building that solid foundation, and assistive technology is that bridge to get students to be able to access curriculum while they're building those foundational skills. Skill building and intervention is not distinct from assistive technology, and it's really important that we see them both as working together so that students can be successful and show us what they know.
So remember that you can go to ctdinstitute.org to see this webinar recording, as well as access any of the materials as part of this webinar. And our contact, we do want to hear from you, so please make sure you click on this link to fill out the survey to get your participation. And if you have any questions or comments following up anything that Kelsey or I presented this evening, please reach out to us. You can contact us through email, through our website, any of those avenues, and please connect with us on social media. We are on Twitter and Facebook, and we do provide really great information and links to so many things regarding literacy as well as assistive technology. So thanks for joining us. If you do have any questions that you want to continue to put in the chat, we're happy to answer them if you're staying with us.
Absolutely. Thank you all for participating with us today.